Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Beatrice, and welcome to another episode of Voices of Asean. Today, we are excited to introduce a new addition to our esteemed panel of adjudicators for the upcoming International Business Review ASEAN Awards 2022, Dr. Brian Shegar, President of the United Arab Emirates Singapore Business Council. This is not the first time Dr. Shegar has been on our show. The last time he appeared as a speaker for the Global Business Forum ASEAN. Dr. Shegar has over 40 years of experience in international banking. He established and has led the operations of Midland Bank, Netbank, and one of the Middle East's largest banks, Emirates NBD, in various locations across the Asia Pacific. He then founded the Middle East-Asia ME-Asia Consultancy, a firm that helps companies in Singapore and the Asia Pacific expand their business to the Middle East. Dr. Shegar also sits in the advisory boards of the BASE Business School and the Journal of Gulf Economics. Speaking on his role as a member of the International Business Review ASEAN Awards and the importance of platforms connecting businesses, here is Dr. Brian Shegar. Hello, Dr. Brian.
Hi, good afternoon, Beatrice. So nice to see you again.
So happy to have you back with us, and you are looking stunning. I love your tie.
You're very kind. You are looking even more stunning, my dear.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Brian. So, Dr. Brian, you've done a lot of work in Southeast Asia, the Asia Pacific, South Asia, and the Middle East, and in facilitating business development opportunities between these regions. Now, Dr. Shegar, just give us the honor by telling us about your journey and what were the biggest highlights of your career.
Now, Beatrice, to answer this question, I'll probably require a few hours because you're really asking me the story of my life.
Yes, I am.
I would love to sort of...
A few chapters from the story of your life, Dr. Brian.
Okay, I'm going to try and do my best, and I'll try and compress it as much as I can.
Okay.
Refer to some of the more salient aspects. If I may start from the beginning.
Sure. As we all do.
If I can sort of tell you about my background and stuff from the beginning.
Yes.
When I was a student, I'm a Singaporean, I'm a sixth generation Singaporean. And my ambition was to be a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And I was, preparing for my A-levels in biology and chemistry and physics and so on and so forth. I was a science student, but I got distracted. I was also a youth leader. And in my late teens, when I was in university in those days, and therefore I didn't qualify for the medical school in Singapore. I was very disappointed myself. So I must tell you, my exposure in terms of being a youth leader, when I look back, was tremendous in terms of what I learned, organizing and leadership and so on and so forth. And so then I was disappointed myself. After national service, I decided that maybe I should leave Singapore, all the distractions, and go abroad to study. And then the question was, what should I do? I always wanted to be a doctor. My whole passion was
you look like one, Dr. Shegar, and you are a doctor now.
I think I would have been a good doctor, honestly, but as I told you, in my folly of my youth, I lost my concentration on my studies from my pre-U and couldn't qualify. And then I thought, let me look at an alternative. And in those days, Beatrice, in the late 60s, Singapore became independent from Malaysia in 65, you remember?
Yeah.
And Singapore was looking at what it can do to create a niche position for itself in ASEAN and in the region. And they decided it would be one of the areas of niche positioning would be international banking and finance. For obvious reasons, because always been good in trade and banking and finance, but they wanted to really make it an international financial center, right?
Yes.
So there was already a buzz on this sort of sector in the late, you would say, they started late 60s.
Yeah.
Policy started late 60s. And I sort of finished my national service. It was 1975. And then I realized maybe this is what I should do. And coincidentally, all these things happen sometimes, Beatrice, purely coincidentally.
I know, right?
Yeah, and there's a university called the City University of London, which is named after the City of London.
Yeah.
And just for those who do not know, the City of London is an autonomous corporation where all the banks in the world are located, including
Yeah.
the Bank of England. It is the financial heart of international banking and finance. It's run by the Lord Mayor of the City of London. It is tremendous tradition, and it is the #1 financial center. It is sort of, you could say, in the east. You know, you have central London is sort of east central London, where you have Threadneedle Street, Cannon Street, and so on, so and so forth. All these very famous areas for banks. 1 square mile, basically.
Yeah.
The university that I looked at, named out of the City of London, and they started a degree in banking and international finance, BSc Honors in Banking and International Finance. So I thought, hey, let me try and do that, because the future, I think, in Singapore, in banking and international finance will be very lucrative. And so I was in the first batch of this degree in BSc Honors in Banking.
Excellent.
The Center for Banking International Finance at the City University of London. And, you know, I did quite well and missed the top prize by 1 mark. And then I did a master's in finance and did a stint in London, in the City of London. And, you know, being Asian, being the oldest, my father was retiring and I was summoned back to Singapore. So I came back to Singapore. And then I started my career in the very buoyant sector of international and offshore banking in Singapore in actually March.
And very lucrative, if I may add.
Sorry?
And very lucrative.
Well, yes, because you see, the area of banking is very segmented.
Yeah.
Banking that most people know is what is known as high street domestic banking, right?
Yes.
But there is another area of banking which is different, which is international banking or wholesale banking and investment banking or merchant banking. And in these areas, obviously the skill sets are different.
Yeah.
And there are more skills, you could say, for example, than being a high street banker in a branch. And therefore you're paid more, but the job is highly demanding. There's no security, it's very volatile.
Yeah.
And there's extreme volatility in the market, right? You're paid for a high pressure job where there is no like real stability in terms of a long-term career. So you got to perform every time, sustain yourself in that career. And that's how I started in the banking industry. I worked for the Midland Bank Group, one of the biggest banks in the world. And in 1985, I had this unique opportunity of being the first third country expatriate in Midland Bank. Normally, when they set up a new office in a country, they would send somebody from head office. Those days, always a Caucasian. And so they said, no, Brian, you are covering Indonesia from Singapore, you speak Indonesian, you're probably more qualified. And I was the first third country expatriate from Midland Bank. So I went to Indonesia, set up the operations there, and then I came back to Singapore, took over the Southeast Asian operations of Midland. I was seconded to Australia for a while. And then from there, I was headhunted by the largest South African bank, which is part of Old Mutual PLC, a huge UK-listed financial services group. This bank was called Nedbank. And I set up their branch in Singapore, looking after Southeast Asia and South Asia. And after a stint of doing that, I thought I'll be entrepreneurial and set up a hedge fund. I realized, you know, think banking is difficult. Wait till you run a hedge fund. It's a killer. And after a year, I said, I better go back to banking. That's why I died out.
What was the biggest challenge when you set up the hedge fund on your own?
Oh, it was so tough. I tell you why, because we were we were following the classic hedge fund model.
Yeah.
The Alfred Jones model.
Okay.
Equity markets. It's called long short equity markets.
Okay.
Long short strategies, where you look at the equity market and you look at those companies that will outperform the market. You do a lot of analysis, and then those who are going to outperform, you will long them. And those who are going to underperform, you short them. So you can imagine there's so much of analysis to be done, so much of work. 7 days a week you're working, and it really takes the life out of you. And I felt that was not the life for me. I'd rather go back to international finance, international banking, and my forte was setting up banks. Yeah.
Is that what made your hair white, Dr. Brian?
Well, that is hereditary, my dear. My family, the males, my father's side, had white hair rather prematurely. And in my industry, I think white hair maybe is more of an asset.
Yeah, I think so. I agree.
So that's when Emirates NBD came into the picture, because I said to them, I was going to go back to banking. My forte is setting up banks, setting for NetBank. So there was no UAE bank in Southeast Asia or Asia. So I said to them, look, you guys, you are out conspicuously of one of the most dynamic regions in the world.
Yeah.
In.
Yeah.
And so I said, this is my strategy for you. I created my own job in a way. And they
Clever.
well, this is the only way. Forget about all these headhunters. They are a waste of time usually most of the time.
Exactly.
So you go for it and create that role for yourself, which is what I did. And they said, okay, make it happen. So I opened the regional branch in Singapore, looking after the whole of Asia, and opened a rep office in China and Indonesia subsequently. And this was certainly a very, in my view, in my career, a very challenging role, because it was a huge geography and very complex types of businesses that I set up.
Yep.
And it also led to my love affair with the Middle East, particularly the UAE. And as you know, I have been involved in the Middle East, particularly the UAE and GCC, ever since I started with Emirates NBD. And until I retired, in 2018, as far as my banking career is concerned, I would say it was always very exciting and exhilarating, but the most, I would say, satisfying and fulfilling role was the one I did for Emirates NBD, the challenge of the job. And so I would say, if you ask me what I have to highlight of my banking career, I would say, opening Emirates NBD and running it in Asia was probably the highlight. Though all my other roles were equally exciting and interesting, but this was the most sort of satisfying and the most gratifying. And if I could say, subsequent to that, as an extension of my involvement with the Middle East, was setting up the UAE-Singapore Business Council. And that too is another story, another sort of sub-story here. When I was running Emirates NBD, Singapore signed FTA with the GCC, which was a big event.
It is.
But the GCC has never signed an FTA with any country in Asia. And therefore, it was a big event. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs organized a business seminar and asked me to speak on behalf of the business community. And there I said, look, the FTA is wonderful. I congratulate both governments, governments of the GCC countries and Singapore for signing it. But to make it work, you need to get the business-to-business connectivity in place.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And for that, there are certain mechanisms. And the most common mechanism is to set up a chamber representing the two regions or the two most important countries in that relationship.
The networking, the detail, the focused networking, right?
Correct. So I mean, I have a lot of experience in this, because when I was running Midland, I was with the British Business Association, which became the chamber, the British Chamber of Commerce. And then I set up the South African Singapore Business Association when I was running NetBank. And so I know the blueprint for this sort of thing, So I gave them a paper, i.e. the government of Singapore and the UAE, the ambassador. I said, this is what we need to do. Let's focus on the UAE, which is the most important trading and investment partner of Singapore, and then make that work, i.e. the relationship between UAE and Singapore and the trade flows, investment flows, and increase that connectivity. So that's what I'm currently, apart from other things that I do, as far as the my sort of business involvement.
Your exceptional career path.
Well, yes, I don't get paid for this job. I'm elected as the president every year. I've been president for sort of 3+ years, and going to be fourth year very soon. And we have a solid group of companies who are in the ExCo, the large UAE companies in Singapore, the large Singapore companies operating in the UAE, and other sort of smaller companies as well. So that really, if you ask me, that's how I met you, Beatrice, if you remember,
Yes. Yes.
because I was speaking at a conference in Dubai for the ASEAN Global Business Forum, and you
Yes.
interviewed
And we
me.
met.
Yeah, and I was there in my capacity as, of course, the president of the UAE-Singapore Business
Mm.
Council. And that's
Mm.
when you and I met in Dubai, and you interviewed me before as well. And that relationship, I'm glad, is evolving in the right
Yes.
direction.
Yes, I'm so honored. I am so honored that we have you as a member of the Adjudication Panel for the upcoming International Business Review ASEAN Awards 2022. And I can't think of anyone more perfect to be an advisor in this role than you, with your connections in Singapore and UAE. Can you share with us what convinced you to join the panel, and how do you see your experiences contributing to your role as adjudicator for the awards?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be part of your education panel. Obviously, I think it's a privilege and an honor to be part of this beautiful thing that you do, which is this IBR ASEAN
Thank
Award.
you.
I think it's an excellent it's an excellent initiative on your part. And I think you have to be applauded for doing this.
Oh, thank you.
And okay, let me answer your question in terms of I don't want to be pompous or presumptuous, but if you ask me about my qualifications or relevance in sort of being in this panel, I would say it's really my background.
Yes.
In my career as an international banker and as being CEO of banks, 3 banks, of different geographical specializations in terms of the country of origin, and of course always covering Asia and always covering ASEAN, is exposure. I have been covering the countries in ASEAN all my life since I started my banking career.
Yes.
Of course, it's not just ASEAN alone, it was Asia and Asia Pac and South Asia. But ASEAN was always the core, the common denominator was ASEAN.
Yes.
And as an international banker, Beatrice, you are therefore lending to companies in different countries. And each country, as you can imagine, has its own unique sovereign risk complexion.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and sovereign risk complexion is a function of all kinds of different variables: political, economic, social, financial, and so on and so forth. Strong workforce, quality of workforce, law and order, stability. When an international banker lends cross-border, this is why international banking is so interesting. The first thing you do is understand the sovereign risk of the country in which your company or the country in which you're lending to comprises. So, as an international lender, you lend to countries, as well as government agencies, as well as companies in different countries, right? The sovereign risk analysis is standard, so you understand that. And of course, when you're lending to a company in a particular country, you need to understand the industry in that particular country and the competitive forces. You need to understand who is exporting to different countries.
The whole ecosystem.
That's right, the whole ecosystem beyond the country as well. With the international competitive dynamic of that particular company in that particular sector or market. Understand the management. The quality of the management, the reliability of the management.
That's right.
The governance structure, the way the company is managed, whether it's managed properly with proper processes and governance, very important. If you're lending to a company where the management is, let's say, very family orientated, with very few professionals running the company, then there are risks. So the risk factors are very important. And when you, of course, when you lend to a company, you also do a financial risk analysis. Understand the balance sheet, the P&L, the forecast of profits, because when you're lending long term, you must understand the cash flow of that company to repay the loan obligations over the period of the loan. That means you must be able to forecast its revenue, forecast its expenses, its margins, etc. Sustainability of the business. So therefore, these qualifications, or rather these exposure experiences, are very relevant in what I guess I'll be doing for you as an educator. Now that's one. I must tell you, the markets that you lend to as a banker in the international banking industry it's offshore and wholesale. Right? That means
Yeah.
you deal with big ticket items, not like retail, small ticket. So my exposure in my banking career, I must tell you, has been largely large companies in middle class. However, over the past few years, when I was head of the business council, I have been dealing with a lot of SMEs. A lot of SMEs join us, by the way. Why? Because they want to do business in the UAE. And of course, they want advice from me and so on and so forth. And also, as you know, I got a small consultancy company called ME-Asia. And so these are largely SMEs. And so I, fortunately, over the past 4 years, because of UAE-Singapore Business Council, my exposure to the SME sector has grown, which I did not have much of when I was a lender, as a banker. The big banks who are involved in international lending don't do SME business, but the local banks. And you know, as an aside, I don't know whether I should mention this, but maybe I should. You see, Singapore and Hong Kong are what what are called the Asia dollar markets.
That's all.
London is known as a euro market. Now, what is the Asia dollar market? What is the euro dollar market? Basically, these are huge amounts of US dollars that is outside the US. And the number one market for offshore US dollars is London, right? And the second two markets are really Singapore and Hong Kong. Now, you would ask, why is there so much of dollars washing around internationally? And the answer is very simple, Beatrice. The dollar is the world's vehicular currency. International trade is all dollar denominated. So Malaysia exports something to, let's say, China, is denominated in dollars, not in Malaysian ringgits. And therefore, international trade is dollar-based, number one. International financing, when these banks in Singapore, Hong Kong, and London do financing, it is always in dollars, most of the time in dollars. The loans are in dollars, US dollars, and the bonds are in US dollars. And furthermore, the reserve banks, the central banks of all the countries in the world, if you look at their reserves, you would find that 75% are dollar denominated. So therefore, there's a huge amount of dollars in the offshore market, London, Singapore, Hong Kong. And those dollars have to be utilized, right? Have to be recycled. Dollar deposits have to be converted to loans and bonds and so on and so forth. So I thought I'd just mention that so people understand what we're talking about when we talk about international finance. It's a very dollar-denominated business. All my career, as 40 years in banking, international finance, I would say 95% of the transactions that I've done are all US dollar based, not Singapore dollar based or ringgit based or any other currency, yen based or euro.
Yeah.
It's actually US dollars. I hope that explains a little bit.
Yes, it did.
So I therefore hope that with this experience that I have, I can be of help to you in terms of your adjudication process.
Yes, it would.
That fit the bill.
It would, Dr. Brian. And I wanted to ask you one more question. In our last interview, you mentioned that it's important to have a platform that connects the business communities and that this was the reason you founded the UAE-Singapore Business Council. Now, what would you say, Dr. Brian, are the biggest hurdles that companies from the UAE face in doing business in ASEAN? And how do platforms like the IBR ASEAN Awards help bridge that gap?
Okay, now, that's an interesting question, okay? And if I may give you again a bit of a long-winded answer, because these are all very relevant questions you're asking me, and educational. People listening to it, hopefully, I hope people are listening to it.
If not now, they would be, because it's going to be there forever on the platform.
You see, let's look at it. You asked me about the UAE.
Yeah.
The Middle Eastern companies, let's say the UAE companies, because UAE is a very important economy. By custom, by tradition, are very comfortable in their own name. Like Malaysian companies.
With their own?
Comfortable in ASEAN.
Oh, okay. Yes, of course.
Thailand. Same thing there, right? By and large, generically, the UAE companies are more comfortable in their own backyard. Their own backyard would be what? GCC.
Yeah.
Egypt, right? Egypt is a huge population.
Yes.
Egypt is one of the biggest populations in the
Yes.
population. So people who want to do consumer-related business like to do this market too. So that is point number one. However, in the UAE, there are some huge companies, conglomerates, like you have in Malaysia, like the Berjaya Group and the YTL Group and the Genting Group and the Tanjung Group and so on and so forth, Abu Dhabi. You have also in UAE huge conglomerates who are very sophisticated.
Of course.
NI in Singapore, NI in Asean. I'll give you some examples.
Okay.
Right? DP World. DP World is one of the biggest port operators in the world.
Yes. Who hasn't heard of them?
You would have heard it.
Yes, definitely.
They operate ports in China, Malaysia, in UK, and so many other countries. Now, that's one. Another would be ADNOC and Saudi Aramco. These are all companies that are all over the world in terms of their dealings. Then you have interesting other companies like Lulu Group, which is a huge supermarket operator. They have supermarkets and hypermarkets in Malaysia and Indonesia.
Lulu, you mean?
Lulu, yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
And then Danata. Danata is a major operator of airport ground services. They have big operations in Singapore and other countries too. They're owned by Emirates Airlines. Of course, you know the Emirates Airlines.
Of course. Who doesn't?
Fly everywhere. And then there are some others like Borouge, huge petrochemical company that have big operations in Singapore. And they are a joint venture between ADNOC and an Austrian company. Petrochemicals. And then there are others like the banks, Emirates NBD that I set up. FAB, they are also all over the place. FAB has a branch in Labuan, for the Singapore regional office. And then we have others like, for example, IFCO, which is a global F&B company from the UAE. They have big operations. They do palm oil sourcing from Malaysia and Singapore, and a few others. So these huge companies are here.
Okay.
Now, when it comes to the smaller companies from the UAE, they require more hand-holding, more scaffolding. They need more education of the market risk and the opportunities.
Yeah.
So you will not see a lot of them. You will see a small number. I mean, we are trying to encourage many of these companies to come to Singapore, but as I said to you, their comfort level is always going to be that region.
Yes.
Markets are good there, so they don't have the urge to go too far.
Yeah.
And I dare say it's a similar situation to some of the smaller companies in ASEAN as well. They require a lot of hand-holding and education before they would go to the UAE or elsewhere too far away geographically. So we try our best, the Business Council. I must tell you another point. Our Business Council is focused on helping Singapore SMEs go to not UAE SMEs to come here.
Okay. No, it's not the two-way thing.
But these hurdles are there. I must tell you, it's quite universal. The SME sector, the smaller companies, are comfortable because of their lack of knowledge, the limited resources. They're more comfortable in their home market, surrounding markets geographically. In the case of ASEAN, within ASEAN. Even within ASEAN, sometimes it's a challenge to get, let's say, a company in Malaysia or Thailand or Singapore to go into all the ASEAN countries.
That's right. So, okay. So investments from the GCC into the ASEAN region are estimated at about 13.4 billion over the last 5 years. If you could pinpoint major sectors then that would drive ASEAN GCC trade and investments in the future, what would they be, Dr. Brian?
Okay, now, if you look at the bedrock,
Mm.
the relationship between ASEAN
Mm-hmm.
and the UAE or the GCC,
Mm-hmm.
it is energy. 40% of ASEAN's energy needs are from the GCC.
Okay.
Even though Malaysia and Indonesia produce oil and gas, but there is still import into Malaysia, import of oil and gas.
Mm.
And so 40% comes from the UAE. So I see that as the bedrock. So the first sector would be oil and gas sector.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But within the oil and gas sector, Beatrice, what is exciting is there are interesting dimensions to it, which are now going to evolve and make that relationship a lot more holistic and exciting. What are these?
Okay.
Let's look at downstream activity.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Downstream meaning refineries,
Mm-hmm.
petrochemical plants.
Mm-hmm.
For example, in Malaysia, Saudi Aramco,
Mm-hmm.
a refinery and petrochemical operation in Penang.
Mm-hmm.
ADNOC has signed a big $2 billion MOU with Pertamina to supply them with sulfur and naphtha. And they're also looking at building a crude to petrochemical refinery in Balongan in Indonesia. Kuwait Petroleum Corporation, which is a big company in Kuwait, they have a 33% stake in one of the biggest refineries, which is in Vietnam, $9 billion refinery there. And therefore, what I'm trying to say is these huge oil companies that have been selling their crude and gas to ASEAN are now saying, okay, let's invest downstream in these countries. And that's a good sign.
Yeah.
Because it creates value in these countries.
Yeah.
These countries just buying oil and gas.
Yeah. Yeah.
You look at the balance.
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
It's good for Malaysia and all these countries because you look at the balance of payments, actually, more is imported into Malaysia and Indonesia and Singapore from, let's say, the GCC, then sold there. The balance of payment is very much in favor of the GCC because they sell so much oil and gas. So this investment in downstream is a good thing for these countries.
Yep, definitely.
So that's one. The second is this very interesting statistic is that the demand for energy in ASEAN is one of the highest growing in the world. It's second only after Sub-Saharan Africa. So Sub-Saharan Africa is the highest. Second is ASEAN.
Wow.
Growing middle class, whenever you have countries with growing middle class, energy demands go up. And the middle classes in ASEAN are growing because of development. All right. And so therefore there will be more opportunities for greater sales of oil and refined products from the GCC and also naphtha, etc., into the ASEAN countries. ADNOC, for example, is signing a big contract to supply naphtha, which is a feedstock for a petrochemical plant in a private petrochemical plant in Indonesia. So that's the second part. Now, another important dimension to the oil and gas sector is logistics. Logistics component in that area. And we're seeing that now. For example, in Singapore, which is a major oil logistics center, Horizon Terminals, a subsidiary of ENOC, members of the Business Council, have a huge operation in Jurong Island. They have a big tank farm, oil tank farm.
Yes.
And then we are seeing in Singapore companies like PC Engineering, Rotary Engineering, Consort Logistics, Bunkers, they are operating in Fujairah, Dubai, and moving on to Abu Dhabi. So it's two-way as well. So ASEAN countries, like in Malaysia, for example, there are oil and gas logistic companies too. They should be looking at doing things in the UAE. Because Fujairah and Dubai and Abu Dhabi, there are a lot of opportunities there. So that's the other sector as far as dimension of oil and gas is concerned, right? These three, I could say these three subcomponents. Now the other area, the second sector, Beatrice, for opportunities, as you asked me, is the IT sector. Why? Because the UAE, for example, and countries in the GCC as well, particularly the UAE, very, very keen to promote IT. They have a Minister of Artificial Intelligence. They've sent a probe to Mars.
I met him. We heard him speak in Dubai, didn't we?
Wow. So you heard him speak.
Yeah, I heard him speak. He was exceptional.
Yeah, and they are so committed to. In fact, I'm leading a delegation to UAE from Singapore end of this month, and the bulk of them are IT companies. With medtech, health tech, healthcare, agricultural tech, artificial intelligence, robotics.
Yep.
I know a Malaysian company in drones that manufactures drones is keen on doing things in the UAE. So there are tremendous opportunities there. They want to do more IT related cross-border investments. Asian company or ASEAN company or Singapore, any ASEAN company that has some unique technology, they should look at the UAE to sell their product, also potentially even get investors if there's something really special. So they're prepared to invest and support new startup companies who have unique IT-related product. This could be things like data analytics, for example. So IT is a very important sector, right? And that's the second. The third sector is renewables. You see, they have decided that they're going to diversify away from fossil fuel. And most countries in the world are doing that anyway.
Yeah.
Because for environmental issues and so on. So they are really into renewables, particularly solar. And even in ASEAN, there is more and more interest in renewables. So solar is a big thing. Of course, wind power and other opportunities, but solar is a big opportunity. There's a tremendous availability of solar energy in the UAE and those part of the world, also in Southeast Asia. So I think you will find a lot of opportunities. Solar, and then the equipment manufacturing companies related to solar also have opportunities there. And I'm convinced that we'll see that dimension growing.
I can see that.
That's the third sector. The fourth sector is actually manufacturing. And why do I say manufacturing? Because the UAE wants to promote manufacturing investment within the country from outside.
Okay.
They want to increase the contribution of manufacturing to the economy to 300 billion dirhams within 6 years. Very ambitious, but they are putting in a lot of effort.
But they're also giving a lot of incentives, aren't they?
Yes, giving a lot of incentives. That's precisely right. And so what's happening? I think there's opportunity here for ASEAN because ASEAN is an established manufacturing sector. Malaysia, for example, Vietnam, Singapore, Thailand, and Indonesia, for example, are all strong manufacturing hubs.
Yeah.
That's true. Right? And with the disruption of supply chain, because of COVID-19, you know what is happening? Interestingly, manufacturing is being diversified to a configuration where there is a trend to set up manufacturing in countries nearer to the market. So, for example, you want to send, let's say you want to do business in the Middle East.
Okay.
The tendency now is going to be for you to actually manufacture in the Middle East for the Middle Eastern market. Because a lot of the countries after COVID-19 feel they want to reduce dependency on buying from one source. They want to diversify their purchases of manufactured products, and they also want to encourage people to set up industries in their own region, nearer to the consumer. And so there, I believe Malaysian companies, ASEAN companies, as a whole, who are strong in manufacturing, if they have a good product, and that product has a good appeal in or market in the GCC countries, should look at manufacturing in the UAE. But that would be a hub, not just, of course, for the country itself, but for the whole region. So that's the other sector. And then the last sector, which I think is very interesting, is halal food manufacturing and distribution. I have seen, for example, from Singapore, major halal food manufacturer investing substantially in UAE, doing halal food manufacturing in the UAE. Very successful. And I'm constantly in the UAE-Singapore Business Council. We get people who are involved in halal food manufacturing who want to distribute their products in the UAE and the GCC. So I see opportunities there. Halal. You look, if I can tell you a little bit more about, again, a little anecdote. What is known as the Islamic economy is very interesting. The global Islamic economy. It's a big growing thing, the global Islamic economy. And the biggest pillar in terms of value is banking. Malaysia is number one in the world for Islamic banking, right? Number one.
Yeah.
Number two is the UAE.
Yeah.
The second most important pillar actually is F&B. And UAE is number one. Actually, UAE is number one in all the other pillars, fashion, travel, etc. But F&B is the second most important sector in terms of the value of the Islamic economy as a whole.
You mean they export? For F&B, the UAE is exporting? Number one in terms of exports?
UAE is in terms of production.
Production.
Food and beverage production and sales and consumption. If you added the contribution to the economy as a whole, it is a substantial amount. UAE is number one. Malaysia is number two, if I'm not mistaken, under F&B manufacturing. Malaysia is number two.
Close, I think, yeah.
Definitely UAE is number one. So, but Malaysia is pretty formidable. So is Indonesia and Singapore. But Malaysia, I think, is very much in this game, in this sector. I see more ASEAN food and beverage halal manufacturers looking at either setting up manufacturing facilities in the UAE or distributing their products in the UAE. Yeah. So these are, I would say, to answer your question, the sectors which I think give opportunities for ASEAN companies. Yeah, I agree. But you said it very eloquently. You laid it all out very structurally. So can I ask, to add on, in your opinion, Dr. Brian, why should business owners and leaders in UAE and Singapore, as well as those in ASEAN, participate in the International Business Review ASEAN Awards 2022? Now, can you repeat that question again?
Okay, so I'm saying, based on all of the above that we had discussed, like a final conclusion, why do you think, in your opinion, should business owners and leaders in UAE and Singapore, as well as those in ASEAN, participate in the International Business Review ASEAN Awards 2022?
Okay. Now, your voice seems to have just gone off. I can't hear you, Beatrice.
You can't hear me.
Now you're back. Okay.
Okay. I think it's my mic.
Okay. All right. Now you're back.
Okay. I'm going to repeat that question then.
Okay. Yeah,
okay. I was just asking you, Dr. Brian, why should business owners and leaders in UAE and Singapore, as well as those in ASEAN, participate in the International Business Review ASEAN Awards 2022?
Okay. Now, I'm going to give you a very frank answer.
Okay.
And as a result of my assessment of the opportunities that are, in my view at least, relevant and opportunities that you should pursue. You have done a great job. I must congratulate you again, you particularly and your team, in establishing the IBR ASEAN Award. But I noticed, this is my first time I'm sort of, as you know, being exposed to what you do and yourself and your company. You are certainly very successful in Malaysia.
Yeah.
So once you look there, you have a number of very successful events.
Yeah.
I've seen the videos in the YouTube and other things you've sent me, and congratulations. I believe that you therefore need to now build on that foundation.
Yes, I do.
And that foundation
we
is
do.
tackling the ASEAN market.
Yeah.
And really, the core ASEAN markets, which are one. Of course, Malaysia is one, Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, the big market, Vietnam. And where the private sector really is very, very vibrant.
Yes. Yes.
Philippines is also substantial, so are other countries, Cambodia, etc. But let's look at the core. It's always Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia.
That's right. That's right.
And very broad-based economy, strong manufacturing sector, strong services sector, very strong services sector as well.
Of course, yeah.
In many of these countries, strong plantation sectors, and value-added activity in terms of processing of agricultural produce or plantation.
Reasonably priced labor.
That's right. So I believe that it is imperative that now, sort of living to your, fulfilling your philosophy and vision of being ASEAN, you need to therefore spread the message of your IBR ASEAN Award very robustly and systematically to all the major ASEAN economies and the business groups, chambers, etc., that operate there. That's my point. First point. The second point, Beatrice, in my humble opinion, just stick to indigenous ASEAN companies. Therefore, forget about UAE companies in Singapore or US companies in Singapore, ASEAN or Malaysia, wherever. Basically any non-ASEAN country who have companies operating in ASEAN. Forget about them. Because that should not really be your focus. Your focus is so much of indigenous companies in ASEAN that have unique products, unique markets, expertise and success stories to share.
Yes.
That is enough to keep you very, 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 very.
Yes, I agree. We are on the same page, Dr. Brian.
So focus on indigenous ASEAN countries.
Yes.
When it comes to those companies that are operating in just Middle East or elsewhere and GCC, just there, completely, take them out of your mind completely. You don't want to have anything to do with them, because if they're not in ASEAN, they're just in the UAE or wherever in the world they are. It's quite irrelevant to you.
But what if they beg and plead, Dr. Brian? I'm joking.
It's okay. You saying something?
But no, what if they say, please let us come in there and be a part of the platform? How do we say no?
No, how can they be part of the platform?
No, Dr. Brian, I'm just joking.
I know they may want to, because you've done a great job in Malaysia. But what is the angle? There's no angle. You are an ASEAN IBR award phenomenon. They are in the Middle East or they are in Europe or elsewhere. What relevance is there? Why should you waste your time featuring them? They've got other domestic equivalent of,
Unless they have like a subsidiary and they are developing it in a very indigenous way within the countries, then it would you think that would make sense then?
Well, you see, as I said, if you have a company X or Y or Z from UAE, from Germany, or the US, or from Japan, and they have something in Malaysia, or Indonesia, or Singapore, I suppose you could say they're an ASEAN company because they're based there. I see your point. However, if you ask me, that's because I'm very ASEAN in my mindset. I like ASEAN to succeed. And ASEAN has opportunity to make itself a real major market. Could be a substantial market. And companies in ASEAN need to sort of be exposed for their successes. Success stories. And that's a huge territory. ASEAN has a lot of countries in ASEAN. So I would rather, unless you are the person in charge of this, I'm not. I'm just an adjudicator in your panel. I have no sort of, you are the owner and you are the visionary behind this. But in my humble opinion, you have enough on your plate to identify ASEAN companies and expose them, give them recognition, and give them appreciation, promote them in the sort of the ASEAN sort of context. You are very good at promoting these companies through various media stuff that you do. Rather than, promoting company X from Japan or company Y from America operating in Indonesia, and they don't need help. They don't really need it. They're probably, a subsidiary of a multinational anyway.
You're right. You're right, Dr. Brian. I think we are on the same page. I love your point of view there. And you're absolutely right.
Sorry for being brutally frank.
No, you're absolutely right. I believe in that, And I am glad you brought that out, because that's what we are about, to search for the businesses that are growing within ASEAN, and they have this unique ASEAN flavor. It's uniquely Cambodian, uniquely Singaporean, I think that's what you're saying. Uniquely Malaysian, uniquely Filipino, and we bring them together and we promote them and say, look, these are your aspiring, growing stars of ASEAN.
Yes. Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you see my point of view here, because, as a banker, sometimes you get to be very clinical about these things, because everything has an opportunity cost, and your energy, effort, and your resources are so limited. So I always tell my staff,
if I have a brilliant adjudication panel such as you, why would I not listen? Well, that was a brilliant idea. And it was always there at the back of my mind. And you just eloquently described it, Dr. Brian. I totally agree with you, 100%. We have to create our own superstars within the region. This is why we have this platform.
Very good. And I wish you success, and I'm sure you will achieve success.
Thank you, Dr. Brian.
You achieve success in Malaysia. Let's now extend that, hopefully, to broader ASEAN.
Yes. So looking at a much stronger collaboration with Singapore through you, Dr. Brian, and I think that's going to be a cinch. Thank you so much for the time that you've spent with us, for sharing with us your expertise and your experience, and I can't wait to start working with you, Dr. Brian.
Thank you so much, Beatrice, for giving me this opportunity to participate in this interview. It's always lovely to be interviewed by you. You have such a charming and graceful style of interviewing people, and I'm always, as I said, there to support you, and I think what you're doing is great, and I would like you to succeed in your ambitions across ASEAN.
Pleasure is all mine, Dr. Brian.
All the best. Thank you.
Thank you. So follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and our website to keep up to date with our upcoming shows. Voice of ASEAN. Thanks you all for your time today, ladies and gentlemen, and we will be uploading a recorded version of this dialogue in our portal for those who missed it. Thank you, Dr. Brian.
You're welcome. Thank you.